API Intersection podcast listeners are invited to sign up for Stoplight and save up to $650. Use the code Intersection10 to get 10% off a new subscription to Stoplight Platform Starter or Pro. Take a look at this episode's description for more details.
I'm Jason Harmon, and this is API Intersection, where you'll get insights from experienced API practitioners to learn best practices on things like API design, governance, identity, auth, versioning, and more. Welcome back to API Intersection. I'm Jason, your host as always, and today we have a guest from Discover Financial Services, George Mitry. George and I have hung out a bit before, but still getting to know each other here. So, George, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Discover.
Hi, Jason. Good morning or good afternoon. I've been with Discover for quite some time now. I founded the API program at Discover, and Discover has changed a lot over the years, and it's one of the best places to work in technology in the US and in the UK as well. We have recently joined the Linux Foundation. Open source, the FinOS Foundation, again, open source, and it's a very exciting place to work at. It's and the API making it even more exciting, and it's my passion at Discover here. I do run the API Center for Enablement, and with that we do have external and internal APIs, right? So for example, when you go with Discover Financial, when you're checking out on Amazon and you find your cashback bonus reward to pay with your cashback bonus or your bonus balance and all that, that goes through the external APIs from Discover. For example, when I have my Samsung phone here, if I'm adding my card to my Samsung, for example, that goes through an API for the Samsung Pay, for example, right? So that's the external API. As a financial service, we partner with a lot of merchants, a lot of B2B partnerships through APIs. It's very easy to partner with. Discover differentiate itself as easy to partner with, differentiated from other competitors. That's quite very large. And then on the internal APIs, we do have a very large program of about 1,500 APIs and microservices that makes up the internal capabilities within Discover. And we can talk a lot about that, how we came about managing and having that catalog and making sense out of that catalog. So that's a quick, plug for what do we do here at Discover.
Very cool. Well, I'll just say plainly, I think you're on the right podcast. This is talking shop on API governance is probably the most common thing we do here. Having done a bit of kind of time in fintech myself at PayPal and Braintree, it's different, right? It's a little uptight compared to some other industries you could work in. So, I guess I'm curious, in terms of setting up governance stuff, how much how much of that effort goes into kind of the financial specifics? And I ask this in part because I know there's a sweeping movement through fintech right now to sort of API-ify everything. And so I'm sure there's listeners who are curious, how that scales out.
Yeah, within the banking and financial industry, things are moving very fast. And there's no question about that. And even though there's a lot of regulations, a highly regulated industry, but it's the demand, the increased demand for speed, and that makes more pressure on the API strategy and API programs, and to be able to balance that, right? And within the API program, security, for example, is top mind always. Whether in internal or external security, and I'm sure it's with many other data. If you're dealing with customer data, you have to do that. But now with the extra scrutiny with the financial regulators and spend a lot of cycles with auditors and the feds and all that, that adds a lot more scrutiny to those processes. But there's the demand is very high for being digital and being transparent about what we're doing within our controls in the company.
Yeah, I feel like one of the things that really opened my eyes at my time in kind of fintech was I feel like there was a lack of general understanding for folks getting into fintech that sort of the risk and compliance factors of getting set up in every country, that is the mountain to climb that sort of new entrants go, we almost got the US figured out. It's like, you're just getting started. But I'd imagine, working in a sort of credit card company like this, that risk and compliance factor must be a lot of the time spent.
Right, and it's a core capability for those global networks, right? Like when when you're already global, you're already and have a footprint and accepting payment in all those countries. It makes it a no-brainer for fintechs to partner with that kind of scale. And APIs are really the way to partner. There's the expectation now is to where's your API? How can I access this, right? And the best API would win, right? And that if your API are easy to use, are making sense, and exactly on what the partner wants, and easy to collaborate with, it becomes a no-brainer to scale and to be able to enter new markets through those API partnerships. We see that a lot in some of those expansions and the discussion with the fintechs. Uh, and the other part of this is also you touched on it, Jason, earlier about how all the regulation and the pressure of the regulation is that we need to optimize the core, right, in order to be able to go fast on the outside, to fast track the external. We gotta have our act together, right, within our internal capabilities being unlocked, because it's layers of APIs, not just one API. You're gonna call it, that API gonna call another one, right? It's a chained kind of, right, layers of other capabilities that are aggregated together to mix up a solution, like a Lego pieces, put it together to build one solution. So it is imperative to have an internal mature API management program, as well as that will feed into that external business growth and digital transformation.
Yeah, I've always kind of described this as like build your internal sort of microservice APIs as though you're preparing to externalize them, because you never know when that sort of partnership opportunity is going to pop up and, some 60-day delivery window. If you have to go back and redesign everything to make it externalizable, you're going to miss those opportunities. So, but I've noticed that in some of the stuff that you've published, you talk about sort of treating microservices and sort of APIs as a different thing. Like maybe we're on a different perspective here. So I'd love to hear a little more about it.
Yeah. So it goes back to the intention of the microservice architecture when it was at its inception. The main investment into a microservice architecture was the agility of the team and getting rid of dependencies and making sure there's a bounded context and of self-contained kind of service, so you can go fast when you need to change and you need all that velocity of the team. That was the main goal, and that's kind of goes, I would say, like under the hood within the internal working of an application, of a capability. Right now, if we define microservice that way, this is within my own team, within my own application, how I'm going to put, the engine here and, with this plug here and this, like this is very internal to my team, and I can change anything in it without impacting anybody. No consumers, kind of like outside my bounded context, my system domain, right? Then APIs comes along. We say those are boundary APIs. Those are the one by contract. I'm gonna keep it backward compatible. I'm gonna notify you ahead of time. I'm gonna manage it in a different way. The investment there is more of a reuse. Now with those APIs, the concept is to be able to reuse those APIs and externalize those capability to the outside world. So that's kind of the distinction we're drawing. There's two level of management, and we have seen that a lot. When we don't have that, you start to treat all APIs the same way in terms of scrutiny, governance, who need to approve, we need to look at all these different things, and team will start to push back. Say, this I'm doing this for my own self. I just within my this isn't. And within there's an iceberg of API strategy. I differentiate between two disciplines. It's a multidisciplinary strategy. There's the discipline of application architecture, which is the microservice, the breaking down, the right sizing of the components within my applications or the modules within my application. That's an application architecture discipline. And then there is the lifecycle management, the versioning, that's an API management discipline for the lifecycle, for the reuse, promoting reuse and promoting some kind of a higher level kind of enterprise level discipline, as opposed to the application architecture within my application walls kind of thing. So that's where we do this distinction between.
I'm sure there are listeners though who would say, like, why would you only optimize for reuse for externalizing things? Shouldn't your internal services also be sort of optimized for reuse?
Reuse with a certain scope within the team. So, and it because of they are in the catalog. So there's visibility into that. Could be some promotion to say, I started this as a microservice, but I will promote it to become, but this on a selective basis. So not because of the 99% of the effort, I can, that 1% of the promotable, I don't want to bog down the management process and treat everybody with the same speed, with the same lower speed, so we can have a fast track for some of those APIs that we know for now, we don't want to overinvest in them, and we know for now they need to go fast. And then when the time comes, because they're visible, we can come to them and make them external as well. So it's like a balance. There's always a trade-off within those decisions. What are you optimizing for? So we want to optimize for reuse and also for self kind of contained speed within the team. So if you want to do both, you got to have two layers of management. And also with the newer modern technology, with the service mesh and the ingress gateways and all that, the infrastructure starts to reflect that as well. Within the east-west versus the north-south traffic, you start to manage, when you classify them that way, you could assign security policies and network policies differently as well. So from a design time, the approval process is different, and then from the runtime also could be the network policies and the security mechanism could be mapping some of the infrastructure technology, native technologies as well.
Yeah, fair enough. You had mentioned this iceberg of API strategy. Really interesting blog post that you did, kind of trying to break down this, kind of what's external to the world and what sort of internal concerns. And much in the same way that, like, I know, like at PayPal as an example, like we had, maybe 50 different endpoints you could use externally, and there was like 5,000 internally, right? But you're sort of arguing that along the same lines, that there's a whole set of sort of disciplines and sort of governance things you should be doing internally that aren't really visible outside. But I don't know, I'm probably mangling your explanation, so say it better than me.
No, I think it's the iceberg is like there's a lot of hidden stuff behind the scene, right? Like the tip of the iceberg is business transformation. That's the ultimate goal of an API strategy, to get into a new market, to get into new business models, and having that digital transformation strategy kind of, and API management underneath that surface, there's a lot. It's one of the most direct precursors to the digital transformation. You gotta get better at managing all those assets and discovering them and documenting them and securing them and making sense out of them and then being able to access them rapidly and put things together in a high velocity fashion, connecting the provider and the consumer together in a way that makes sense to them. So there's in order to be able to orchestrate all that underneath the water, there is all those different disciplines as elements or part of that hidden work that need to be orchestrated. And I think one of the things that we have learned over the years is that you get out of API strategy as much as you put into it, right? So many APIs programs could be saying, if you look at the order of the element in the iceberg, at the very bottom, there is security and compliance. Some programs are just all about that, right? About security and compliance. That's a good place to start. Always, there's you have to start somewhere. So if the focus is security and compliance, you're going to get security and compliance, but you have not reached yet the digital transformation, because that's you put in, you get out what you put in, right? And then there is the right on top of it, there is the application architecture piece. That's what we were talking about modernization of the stack, right sizing the module, eliminating some of dependencies within the boundaries of a team and all that, right? All that within the application architecture discipline. Then you go a little bit higher, and if you start investing in the life cycle management and the reuse and the version strategy and making sense, you're having that catalog and the taxonomy of APIs, then now you're getting more and more out of that strategy. And then there is the ability to, and there's a lot of going on with Discover in the past 2 years about the developer enablement. So it's a learning organization, teaching organization, to be able to have like an inner open source collaborative model for developers to contribute and to be able to set the standard in a collaborative way, not an ivory tower way. So that's where we call the Center for Enablement, not Center of Excellence, for example. That's one of the enablement versus ivory towerish kind of excellence, Center of Excellence thing. And then on top of that, once we tackle that enablement of the developers and the teaching organization or the learning organization, that machine that spread and keep evolving all the standard from the community patterns, solution-driven patterns, and all that, you start to get into the product-centric, and that's a whole set of environment in the organizations. If every team is a product team, now the API strategy can really align with the business, can really align with those product capabilities that's already out of the box. It makes it much easier. Now, as I put all the behind the scene, like the security, the modernization of the technology stack, the taxonomy and the lifecycle management and the teaching of all that, now I start to get more benefits as much as I put into it with the product centricity, right, of that. And we can align easily with the business that way. And now you get to the tip of the iceberg, which is, being able to have that digital transformation based on all those different disciplines orchestrated and working together in one vision for that digital transformation.
Beautifully put. We've heard all that sort of stuff before, but I don't think I've ever heard anyone describe all the layers of the lasagna in one shot and made sense. So nice job. Yeah, you touched on some of this, like, the shift away from center of excellence and kind of this more federated style governance, all that sort of stuff. Loved your recent post on fallacies of API governance. I feel like this is where you kind of went down that rabbit hole a bit. And I love the connection to sort of, distributed computing and kind of what and the SOA era and all these things that we should have learned. But, it's like you look around and sometimes question if anybody learned anything, or maybe we just forgot. But yeah, I guess I'm curious, are there sort of high points in that post that you feel like we kind of haven't covered here, or did we just do it?
Yeah, and I think, there's we talked about the product centricity, right? And then um, that's kind of like the environment to set teams for success. 2 years ago, we started that journey within Discover to move from project to product, and now we're doing the from product to platform. Now the API strategy is kind of getting into that, and I think some of um, the 8 fallacies that we've talked about. I think we are at that critical mass moment in the industry where there's we're still the old mindset trying to be applied, while we have all those thousands and explosion of the number of APIs, and we don't know what to do with them, and we keep trying with the same way as in the past. And I think there are two main, I'd see, learning lessons here. One is uh, the open. We learn a lot from the open source community and how governance is happening in the open source communities, and how there's a maintainer and there's open for collaboration, and that kind of a mutual win-win. So uh, running the engineering practice as an inner open source kind of collaborative model, right? May the best standard win kind of thing, right? Um, and having the openness to have anybody in the community to suggest or question the standard, and have that built-in mechanism for teaching the standard and getting feedback, and having those. So as part of our Center for Enablement, as a community, we have many of the working groups. One of the working groups just focus on standards, open for the communities, chaired by enterprise architecture, and many of the people who are accountable for the standards. They are maintaining those standards, but they are doing it in a fashion that it's open, collaborative, with every one in the engineering community to participate, and that's very helpful, because when people are listened to, we evolve much faster, and we shift left. Before we publish that standard, we know the community already have a commitment to it, right? And we can shorten that cycle of adoption that way. And it's an open invitation, transparent. We have our repo, Git repo for all the minutes meetings and all that, and anybody can join and all. So all that is done in the open, right? And then the other aspect is is to move from being like the ivory tower to a teaching organization, or learning organization. So anybody in the community as well can teach a pattern, a solution. They can share their solution they're putting together, and that can be promoted to become an enterprise standard. Right? There's a mechanism to do that. So the openness and the learning organization, that's where it gets the academy, Discover Technology Academy. Internally and externally, we have Discover Technology Experience, technology.discover.com. We publish many of those, share some of those patterns and solutions out to the outside world as well. So it does have those two aspects. Out of those fallacies, if you want to flip those fallacies on their heads, now you gotta have that learning machine, going, coaches, advocacy, and all that as part of the governance. You see that as part of the governance. It's not really separate from that. And then you've got the openness, the open model. So the API governance, if you think about it now, with all those additions, it becomes more of an attestation body than an enforcement body. If I think about like the hit miss ratio on a cache, right? Within our processes for approval, the hit miss ratio would be very high, right? Because all the solutions will be based on a solution pattern, based on something that everybody committed to. It's already built in automation in there. The community already built something there for to abide with. So we can see all those just pathing through. as opposed to handing out exceptions all the time and being the enforcement gate late in the game, and being a surprise for everybody. Like, oh, I didn't know I need to do that. So that teaching organization is extremely important, as well as the openness and being able uh, to govern through with that open model.
Yeah, beautifully put. I've seen it myself, and we've heard it a bunch from practitioners here that like the technology part of these transformations isn't the hard part; it's the cultural change, and I feel like that's part of what you were just enumerating. There's like I'm terrible about having like a one-liner to try to capture an idea, and then I'll just beat that one-liner to death for years. So I think like you touched on a bunch of things that I've said a bunch of times is like one, you can't have transformation without APIs. End of story. Right? Like that's the core thing, right? Because that's how you manifest this sort of reusable capability mindset. And then you can't do that sort of transformative momentum with APIs if you're not breaking down silos. And that's kind of what you describe as this inner source thing, right? I find like that's one of the parts that that companies get hung up on the worst is just this entrenched dogma of like, I have my thing and I protect it, and then I have the contract to integrate, and no one else can touch it. But to your point, if it's open enough in its design and everybody's working along the same lines, then why wouldn't you take contributions from another team that you have some agreement with? Right? Like, and just getting those habits changed is so hard.
Right. And having so there's two things here. One is on the code itself. You're adding features on the cycles of other. You're not using your resources. You're using other resources. That's a win-win, right? It's you're maintaining your product on somebody else's dime. If you're other people's money, right?
But humans value a sense of control, right?
Yeah, so that's to your point. It's a culture change to start to think, oh no, I'm winning here, and it's not really I'm losing anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's the total opposite of that. And then the beauty of what we have done in Discover, I think, in the past 2 years, is that applying this openness and open source to managing standards and managing other, just not code but content and standards of best practices and all that, right? So there's a guild. We have something, for all those types of standards that people can contribute, and there's the maintainer of that, and we built a whole within the academy, a whole life cycle of those content and of those patterns, and can be reviewed and updated and all that. So it is fascinating, and how many lessons we could learn from the open source communities, and how that could be applied to on multiple layers.
For sure. Well, and considering the failure rate of these things over the last 5-10 years, right? Like the vast majority of transformation attempts fail. So I feel like these are the things that we beat the drum a little bit here on the podcast, I think, on these exact points all the time from practitioners, but it's because it's like problematic so often. So great advice. So, I'm sure there's some listeners here, let's say, smaller company, just getting the ball rolling and all this, and imagining a future where, they're in an organization as big as Discover, but you rattle off a long list of stuff you got to do. So I guess I'm curious for, folks who are looking to just get started, or maybe they're even in a larger, older company that hasn't, started modernizing yet. When you look back on this past few years, where do you think you would start to have the biggest impact and kind of get that momentum swinging the best?
Yeah, that's a good question, because every it's a little bit tricky, because every company is as unique, and there's certain constraint that you have to work within first, and that's our experience in Discover too. When we started with security, for example, and that was, I think, a good call to start there, because that gave us the inventory of API. When we have a mandate to every API has to be secured. it's easy to get that sponsorship from security, from executives. Like, it's very easy to sell that, right? It's nobody will.
Easy to justify API security these days when you dig into breaches, right?
Right. So that's where we could start, and that will help the inventory, because now if you have to secure it, you have to register it, you have to, so there's now a whole inventory of what you have. That's without that, you can't even do anything, right? Like the beginning of wisdom, I call it, right? A beginning of wisdom is to be able to, I would call it like, call things by its name. But if you don't have it, you can't even call it by its name, right? So the inventory is where I would start, and security can give me that inventory. And then...
Yeah, it's an interesting approach. I mean, I definitely have, sort of seen and heard that before, that like, step one is like build the catalog. That's another kind of, analog or same kind of intent with the word catalog inventory, is like, at least know what you have. Right. And these days, everyone's got microservice sprawl problems. So it's often the good place to start. But I love this idea of justifying and building it through a security lens. That's fascinating.
Yeah, that's our experience and how we started. And we ended up with almost, I would say, virtually 100% coverage in all our APIs, business APIs, because there's a whole slew of infrastructure APIs that's we're not managing now. But it's more of the business APIs are, because they had to be secured. We have that catalog with virtually 100% coverage. And then we do have the, after that, I think, if the organization is already product-centric, that makes life easier.
But most aren't.
It's much easier to align with, so you don't have to define those boundaries yourself as a technology, and that's one of the pitfalls too. Technology try to define the bounded context, or what should
you end up with an engineered experience, don't you?
Right. It's all about the tools and the technology, but there's very hard to find business value later on, right? So
yeah, you mentioned like sort of grammar, vocabulary kind of stuff before, which we've heard before, and I think that's the side of the house that tends to do better at defining those things versus a bunch of engineers who name things in acronyms and system names.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, we talked about this. Yeah, like maybe last year when we met. Yeah, that's another thing on being really product centric and having a well understood boundaries by the business, and the technology the infrastructure would reflect those boundaries that well understood by the business and put our APIs there. I think that would be a good next step to set up team for success.
Yeah, it's not a popular term anymore, but in some ways, you're just describing the old inverse Conway maneuver, right?
Right. Yeah, it's all interwoven.
Intentionally flip the organization on its head and design it as you want it to be in the future, and then fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
So cool, George. Well, I really appreciate you sharing all, kind of some of these insights. We already kind of called out, and I'll just double down, check out the Discover Technology Academy for Engineers. You must get the Discovery thing a lot.
Yeah, we do.
That's okay. We get Spotlight at Stoplight all the time. Any other kind of parting words of wisdom or folks that you think folks should look at for kind of resources to back this up?
I think it's, technologies.discover.com will have lots of those insights with great colleagues of mine at Discover. They're all publishing there. Sharing that experience and contributing to the open source, the openness model that we are promoting in Discover and outside. That would be great. And that was really fun talking with you today, Jason.
Yeah, definitely. It's always a treat to get to talk with folks running kind of the program and governance stuff. It's it's a free pass for me to talk shop and not have to work. Thanks for listening. If you have a question you want to ask, look in the description of whichever platform you're viewing or listening on, and there should be a link there so you can go submit a question, and we'll do our best to find out the right answer for you.